Pastor Mark, so the question is, can you explain the Adventist government to us? If there's some problem in a church, for example, maybe a pastor that's doing something, or maybe some outside source, some problem happening there. What are the different, we've got conferences, we've got unions, we've got the general conference. How does everybody play? What are their roles in a problem, and how they solve it?
Matt, that's a very practical and a very good question. In the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have a constituent basis for our governmental structure. It's really based on Scripture, where Moses had a decentralized approach to solving problems. Remember, it was the thousands, the hundreds, the 12s, etc. And so in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there are four basic levels of church administration and church governance. First, you have your local church. The local church is governed by a local church board. Problems within the local church are to be handled by that church board. Then each local church, is a part of a larger structure called the conference. In our church structure, the physical facility of the local church is owned by the conference, not the members of the church. I'm talking about the physical plant, the building. Why? Because let's suppose that you had a renegade, rebellious pastor or congregation that wanted to take that whole church out of the orbit of Seventh-day Adventist teachings and theology. Then the conference owns the building, so they couldn't take the building with them. The local conference is responsible for churches within that state conference. So many of our conferences are lined up according to states. There are some that you have conferences that are in more than one state. But typically, you have what we would call the state conferences. But again, you have conferences that may overlap into other states. The responsibility of the conference is to minister to, support, encourage local churches. The tithe from the local church goes on to the conference. The conference then uses that tithe to pay the pastors. Now, what if you have a problem in a local conference? How can that be dealt with? In two ways. First, the constituency of that conference meets approximately every 4 years. And so each church can choose delegates based on a proportional representative form of government that go to a constituency meeting. One way of making a change in a conference is voting new leadership in. And that is done in constituency meetings. That happens. But let's suppose that doesn't happen. Let's suppose you're between sessions and there's a problem that's very egregious in a conference. The next level of organization is the union. The Union of Churches deals with a multi-state or multi-conference area. The responsibility of the Union of Churches is to guide, nurture, spiritually support, resource, help to develop major plans. And that happens in the conference level too. It's a strategic planning for evangelism, for outreach, and so forth. But the Union of Churches consists of those conferences within that particular union. In some of the smaller overseas fields, we have what we call the Union of Churches, which they may be too small to have a conference and they're directly attached to the union. But the union's responsibility when it comes to problem solving, Matt, is to work with the conferences to solve that particular problem. It could be personnel problems, it could be theological problems, it could be a variety of problems. I don't want to give the impression that the function of unions and conferences is merely to solve problems or give direction. It is not that at all. It is to plan mission. The function of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is to fulfill the mission of Christ, where Jesus said in Matthew 24, verse 14, "This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations. Then the end shall come." Where Jesus, through John and the angel in Revelation 14, verse 6 says, "I saw another angel flying in the middle of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those that dwell on the earth." So the function of every administrative unit, whether it's a local church whether it is a conference, whether it is a union of churches. The function of those is to nurture members spiritually so they know Christ, so they can be ready for the coming of Christ, and so that they can proclaim the gospel and facilitate that. Then you have what's called the division. Now, the division does not have a constituency. The division is a division of the general conference. Some people think we have 5 layers of organization. We do not. They would say you have a general conference, you have a division, you have a union, you have a conference and a local church. No, the division does not have a constituency. The division is a division of the general conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Now, a lot of people would wish that the general conference could solve problems in a local church, but that's not how our governance structure is set up. The president of the general conference does not have the authority, as some would think that he might, to wave a magic wand and solve every local church problem. That church problem is dealt with by the local conference. Because if you don't have that kind of a structure, you can easily have abuse of authority. So we have a structure that is constituency-based, where conference leadership is elected by representatives from local churches. Union leadership is elected by representatives from conferences, not all administrators and lay people from those conference areas. And union administration is elected by conference delegations. What about division leadership? How is that elected? It's elected at a general conference session by the general conference constituency. So we are based, our whole structure is based on the idea of lay involvement, pastoral involvement, administrative involvement, working together to accomplish the ultimate mission of Christ, to build up the people of God and to facilitate mission.
Thank you again for that answer.